Before women's basketball had the dazzling passes of Tisha Penicheiro, Becky Hammon, or Sue Bird, there was Peggy Lawson and Tricky Vicky Nelson. Before Raquana Williams scored 51 points and Liz Cambage dropped 53 points in a single game, Machine Gun Molly Boland reached the 50-point mark 4 times, and Butch Moore scored over 35,000 points in her barnstorming career. Before Maya Moore became synonymous with social justice in sports, Black ballers like Ora Mae Washington and Inez Patterson promoted discussions about race relations, and Elvira Peps Newman spoke about economic empowerment for women. Welcome to the Barnstormers podcast, an introduction to the trailblazers of traveling women's basketball. I am your host, LaChina Robinson, a women's basketball analyst at ESPN. I will be narrating this 4-part podcast series that chronicles traveling women's basketball teams of yesteryear. The Women's National Basketball Association tipped off June 21st, 1997. In the historical game, the Los Angeles Sparks hosted the New York Liberty at the Great Western Forum. That first WNBA tip-off marked the start of a new era of women's professional basketball. Teams over the years have come and gone, but the league sits all 12 teams strong. Even as other women's sports leagues and concepts arise, the WNBA remains the standard by which all other women's sports are judged. Today, the WNBA continues to captivate the women's basketball community with their skill, grit, and pioneering spirit. Yet the WNBA is not where the story of professional women's basketball began. What if I told you the WNBA is not yet half as old as the longest run of women's professional basketball in the United States? That's right. Before the American Basketball League and WNBA started in the late 1990s, and before the Women's Basketball League tipped off in 1978, 11 different women's teams barnstormed America. The All-American Redheads were the first and longest-running franchise of 11 total barnstorming teams. Starting in 1936, women were paid to travel across North America and the world playing basketball. The Redheads played for 50 years before eventually disbanding in 1986. Here's Marsha Adams, a former All-American Redhead.
Who knew what a professional athlete was back then? All I knew, I was traveling, I was getting paid minimal amount of money, but I was enjoying myself, getting to see the country. And I grew up really fast. I was 18 and I'd been away from home, but not very much. And getting to go to a new place every day and see new people and learn about the country and seeing it from ground level was amazing.
Jolene Ammons, another redhead, talks about the popularity of their teams.
We played all size towns, but we played a lot of small towns. And regardless of where we played, if the gym seated 500, it was full. If it seated 5,000, it was full.
Here's former redhead Debbie Loftus.
You had to love the game in order to do what we did. It was hard. And so all of the games that we played, it was wonderful. It was terrific. I love playing. I love the cheers and the audiences.
And yes, we'll hear about the game from former players like Tricky Vicky Nelson.
Meeting different people and having different teammates and putting smiles on people's faces and getting the opportunity to show that women could play basketball at a high quality. It was just the sportsmanship of it and traveling. I really loved it all.
Pioneers, role models, athletes. The Barnstormers podcast will share stories from players, giving you a glimpse into everything from the athlete's first pro season to the induction of the All-American Redheads into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 2012. She Plays co-founder and CEO Ashley Hart spoke to former players, their family members, and historians about the Barnstormers. Hart based her research on John Molina's 2018 book, Barnstorming America, Stories from the Pioneers of Women's Basketball. Here's John Molina.
When I was growing up, I used to play in my grandmother's attic, and up in her attic was this picture of a girls' basketball team, which had her on it. But unfortunately, I never asked my grandmother anything about the picture or her playing days. And then she ended up passing away in 1990. And then a few short years later, being from Connecticut, we started following UConn. And, watching Rebecca Lobo out on the court, and I'm starting to think back to my grandmother, wow, how did we get from bloomers of the 30s and the Depression to national TV and UConn and crew with playing against Tennessee? And it just started a passion for me. I love history, and I just wanted to learn how did we get from the days of the bloomers to today's game.
On the Barnstormers podcast, you'll hear how the Barnstormers were recruited. Here's Diane Kirkland Warren of the Southern Bells.
It was my senior year that a representative from the All-American Redheads showed up at my high school, and they called me to the office to speak with this gentleman. He was a scout for the All-American Redheads, and he told me that they had heard about me, and they were interested in talking to me about a position with the Redheads.
Brenda Moon Davis will tell you about the rigorous training camp the players had to survive before hitting the road.
I kind of packed up and headed out for that first training camp and survived it. It was not easy, but survived it. And then it just kind of became a routine thing after that.
Here's Vicki Nelson again.
We were the clown jewels of basketball. We put on a good family show that was entertaining and some comedy mixed in with, actual basketball playing.
Stay tuned to hear the stories of these incredible women in the 4-part series of the Barnstormers podcast, an introduction to the trailblazers of traveling women's basketball. Thank you for listening to the Barnstormers podcast. This series is produced by She Plays and written by Erika L. Ayala. Sit-down and phone interviews were conducted by Ashley Hart. Erika L. Ayala provided audio from the 2020 WNBA season. I am your host, LaChina Robinson. The Barnstormers podcast is hosted on Buzzsprout and can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts.